It's 11 o'clock and we'll get started. So good morning from Sage, Classroom C in Churchill Square. Good morning from the Edmonton Pride Seniors Group. I do thank you for attending our weekly Aging with Pride discussion group for 2S LGBTQ seniors and allies. Thank you too to our partners, Sage and the Pride Center of Edmonton. Before I introduce our speaker, I must acknowledge that we are located on Treaty 6 territory and respect the history, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our lives. A couple of housekeeping items. Firstly, to let you know that this session will be recorded for future use on our YouTube channel. If you don't wish your image to be recorded, please simply close your video feed. Secondly, we ask that you respect the speaker by remaining muted during the talk. We will unmute you for the Q&A section. And finally, please respect the confidentiality of any personal information that you hear here today. Our speaker today is Eric Storey with a whole number of affiliations, but today from Age Friendly Edmonton, as well as Aging with Pride. You know Eric, but throughout his professional career, Eric volunteered with nonprofit and social development programs. Following his retirement in 2007 from the manufacturing center, he was able to increase his community involvement and obtained a Bachelor of Social Work degree as one of his retirement projects. He is able to combine social work skills, previous management, governance, and volunteer experience to be engaged in the community. His work is focused on social justice issues, primarily in the area at risk and in-care youth, marginalized seniors, and sexual and gender minority populations. Over to you, Eric.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. I'm hoping that this will run smoothly. So I'm working with about 2 hours sleep, so just bear with me. And we will find the right slide to share here. This is it. We're talking about a toolkit for fostering inclusion in senior serving organizations. And this came about in a long manner. And I'm going to talk about some of the history because I think it's fairly important. One is that after I went to get my BSW, I had to do my practicum, and I did my practicum here at Sage. After I finished my practicum, they said, "How would you like to come and work for us?" And I said, "What part of retired do you not understand?" But I really enjoy doing work with seniors. And so I said, well, you know, if it's a day a week here or 2 days a week there, or maybe a week and a half while somebody's on vacation, I'd love to do it. So I became the housing coordinator to help seniors find affordable housing. And as part of that, we got into finding places where people didn't feel comfortable, where they didn't feel that they were included. And so said, well, let's have a look at that. And I was talking with Michael, and he said, Michael Thayer, and he said, golly, we're working on, we're a little bit concerned about this. I think Maureen, what's her name? Maureen Irwin, and he had been talking about it and concerned about it. So we said, well, why don't we start working on a process of educating housing providers? And that was, we sat down, talked about that for a while and thought, let's approach a couple of housing providers. And we started to do that. And then I stumbled across the North Texas Coalition for LGBT Housing, which was a really interesting organization, North Texas. Who would have thought? What they did, though, was they did a housing survey. And they sent out a survey to all of the providers of seniors housing in the North Texas region with a questionnaire, which I'm going to show you in a moment. right here. There we are. And this is just part of it. There are a total of 16 questions in 4 domains, policies on employment and equity. The next domain is resident procedures and forms, outreach and marketing, all sorts of things like that. So that was very good, but it just, it covered only LGBTQ issues, nothing else. And it said towards this end, the part of it is towards this end, our team leads are trained to work with staff in partnering housing communities to implement visible and meaningful changes to indicate overt acceptance and affirmation to the LGBT population, or as we like to tell each other, making the implicit explicit. But the thing was that after the people who responded to this questionnaire, the results were published, which was a little bit of a shock to me. And we felt when we talked that when, I showed this to a few folks, they said it's a great questionnaire, but it's a little bit coercive or oppressive. If somebody doesn't get a higher score, what is the incentive? If somebody knows that they're going to score very low, what is the incentive for them to even take the survey? So we thought that wasn't a great idea. So after a while, I was asked to sit on the board of the Edmonton Seniors Coordinating Committee and Age Friendly Edmonton. And we started to talk about housing inclusion in senior centers and other areas. And this was a real focus for Age Friendly and the Seniors Coordinating Council, that they really felt that senior centers particularly needed to be a little bit more open and accepting to change, because there were a lot of old assumptions. If you look, 40 years ago, what the seniors population in Alberta looked like is not what it looks like today. We had a lot of people coming to Alberta starting in the 1950s through the 60s and the 70s, particularly huge influx of people, not only from different areas of Canada, but from different countries. And some of these folks would be able to sponsor their parents to come here. So there's some seniors that came, and these people were getting old as they were. And a lot of organizations, when we first started chatting with them, said, well, we've been doing this for 30 years. We know what we're doing. But the problem was they still hadn't recognized that the population has changed and looks different than what has done. But the good news is, when we talked to some organizations, they said, absolutely, we really are committed to making change. And we've already started down that path. But we could use some help. So we thought one of the things that we should do is, first of all, focus on research and information gathering. Over the years, I collected some information on inclusive housing. But the other part is that I chaired the diversity hub for Alberta, for Age Friendly Edmonton. But what I was interested in saying is not just LGBTQ issues, it's inclusion means inclusion. People of color, people of different religions, people with different dietary habits. Those are the things that needed to be attended to. And so we thought, how do we, let's gather this information on all inclusion. And let's have a focus on people trying to do a self-audit. How can we help them figure out where they stand and where they need to go? And we wanted it to be a cooperative process. And we also wanted them to be able to have a clear direction of, I'm here, how do I get to the next step? So with that, we had a chat with the Edmonton Social Planning Council, and we had Susan Morrissey as our guest speaker at the beginning of December, talking about the Social Planning Council. And really, I have to say this, we're really very, very fortunate in Edmonton to have such a well-respected social research team here in Edmonton. And the Social Planning Council has been focused on researching social issues such as poverty, housing, inclusion, and so on. So we talked to them and said, okay, here's all of the information that we've collected. Some research material from, the federal government needs of seniors and so on. And why don't you take this and do some of your research in addition and tell us what your plan would be to help us come up with a toolkit for these organizations. And the methodology that they laid out was take this information, certainly take the North Texas survey, but also the federal government reports and so on, and interview representatives from marginalized and equity-seeking groups, basically with a question saying, when you walk into a space, what are the things that tell you I belong here, I'm accepted, and I'm going to be happy here? And similarly, what are the things that tell you this place isn't for me? So we wanted to talk to a few groups to get their input on, or their insight into those areas. So we came up with a plan and they said, well, we're going to interview a bunch of people from these marginalized and equity-seeking communities. And then COVID came. And we put interviewing on hold because we thought we couldn't interview face-to-face because of COVID. But we felt that to get genuine, non-threatening responses, it would have to be, in person. So we said, well, we'll just resume interviewing. They had done the research. We'll resume the interviewing when COVID is over. But that dragged on a little bit too long. One of the benefits of COVID is people started to get used to talking on Zoom and being, not feeling intimidated by Zoom. So we had a few discussions with the Social Planning Council. They consulted some experts. They did just an absolutely wonderful job. And they conducted these interviews over Zoom. And when they finished doing the interviews, they wrote up a preliminary report and went back to these organizations and said, did we get this right? What changes would you suggest? So the feedback was incorporated, revisions were made and rechecked, and the final copy was issued just before Christmas of 2022. And Christmas and January, a lot of people are concerned about making plans for Christmas. And January, a lot of people are into, we put the whole month of December on hold. Now we better get some work. So we're planning to do the rollout of this toolkit towards the end of January. So this is a preview of it, really. And Rachel just arrived, so that's it. So here's what we came up with, is the Age Friendly Edmonton Toolkit, a toolkit for fostering inclusion in senior serving organizations. And what it includes is 62 questions in 11 domains. And those domains are welcoming, physical space, accessibility, cultural connections, intergenerational contact, lifelong learning, relationships, staff competency, addressing barriers, now what, and policies. So that's, in each of those domains, there's several questions. Some domains have more questions than others. But the idea is really for it to be a self-audit process so that people can go through and say, where do we stand? And so I'll just show you. So this is from the domain, now what? Do you have connections with other organizations that specifically serve equity seeking groups? In policies, do you have anti-discrimination and anti-bullying policies? Honestly, I can't, I know a lot of really inclusive organizations, but there's few that I could think of that would go through and check off every single one of these questions. But again, it does say, you know, do you have anti-discrimination and anti-bullying policies? If the answer is no, maybe that's something that you could work on. And when we talk to community agencies, this is going to be our approach. You know, it's easy to get overwhelmed. I can remember, you know, on some boards when we were working on strategic planning, and the first strategic plan I went to, people came up with 20 objectives for next year. And that's impossible. You know, you want to pick 3, maybe 4 to work on. And that's going to be the suggestion, is to say, everybody, I can't think of an organization now that isn't at least aware of the fact that diversity is important and that they might have to do some changes. But what we hope is that these questions, these 62 questions will give some people an idea of where to go on that. And for each section, you see that it says policies, page 22, or now what, page 22. So if you go to page 22, this is just an excerpt of the explanation behind that domain, why you want to, you know, like, so the suggestion of try engaging with a group of seniors from particular equity seeking groups. So this is what we're hoping is that when people can fill out the questionnaire, fill out that self-audit, and for each section go and read what the guideline for that section is, because we think that the guideline will give organizations where they might want to go next. And that's really how we want, you know, how we want them to do it. As I say, for each one, there's an explanation of why this certain domain is important. So the now what is quite simple. We're rolling this out to organizations, groups, individuals, and we're seeking feedback. One of the reasons that we wanted to present here today is that we don't want this to be only organizationally driven, for the board of directors of an organization to say, okay, we've got the toolkit, here it is. Now let's go. It needs to be top down, but also needs to be bottom up. So we're hoping if anybody wants a copy, I'd be more than happy to email out a copy after this meeting. So that, you know, if you're connected to an organization and you don't feel that they're being inclusive, that maybe you can talk to them about, well, do you have policies? You know, how do you welcome people in? These are all really important elements in terms of making people feel welcome. And there's various processes, and different organizations handle it in a different way. I know, you know, at one organization, they have somebody at the door welcoming people in, talking to them, getting to know them, and initially getting them to feel welcomed at that space, and then introducing them to some other people who attend the facility. And that's really important, because it's fine for us to walk in the door and somebody to say, hi, welcome, we're very glad you're here. And then say, you're on your own, figure it out. We really, that ambassador or welcoming person who not only welcomes somebody, but tries to get them integrated into the group right away. So that's really, that's a fairly short presentation, but that's really where I was. I didn't want to bore you with too many of the details, but I would hope that you can, you know, that, as I say, if any people are interested, be more than happy to email out a copy of this. We will be sending this out to the organization, to senior serving organizations in the city. And we hope that it's going to be not just to SLGBTQ, but people of other face of other colors, of, just to be very inclusive. And it's a question of education, and that's what I really, the North Texas was a good starting point for it. It was a good place to look at, but the idea of publishing failing marks didn't really appeal to me, and I didn't think would appeal to any organization. What we really, our approach to this is really, we know that everybody has started on this, but people might need a bit of a hand to get to the next step along that roadmap. And that's where we are. So I'm going to stop sharing. But there we are. So if anybody has any questions, if they would like to make some suggestions, if I'm open hearing, and somehow my screen is up there, but I don't know. I think, does everybody see a picture of the gallery, or is everybody seeing the slideshow?
Yeah, we can see the gallery just fine, Eric.
Okay, good,
Okay.
good.
Because of what we can and can't see here, it's probably easiest if you physically put up your hand. If you have a question or a comment that you would like to make.
Yeah, I think Jan is in a better position to.
Sure, I can take over the questions and answering if you want.
Would you please? Thanks.
Oh,
Jan.
sure. But just a technical question, Eric. There was
Yes.
one slide that was shown for the whole presentation. One slide came through to mine. Did you go through more than one slide? Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. Yes,
Oh.
I did.
Okay. Did anyone else
Okay.
experience that?
I have experienced with that. I couldn't. Well, only the first slide was up.
Well,
How could they change for us?
yeah, I really
Yes, I
sorry.
only saw the one slide.
Well,
Okay.
basically, the slides were just a very brief overview of what I was going to say. So it's not to be worried too much, except for the slide that about that showed some of the questions.
It was
which is-
okay. It was okay without the slides, Eric. Your
Okay.
talk was very clear, so
Okay.
not to worry.
So that's really it. And I guess the first question is, do people feel that this type of tool would be useful for any organizations that they are in touch with or a member of?
Yeah, they answer that. Certainly, I think it is useful, and its use depends, as you alluded to, on how it's used. That if somebody simply comes and fills check marks, then it's of no value. But this, if it's used as an educational component for staff at all levels and all functions, then it does become very helpful in establishing not only what the policies are, but what the actual practices and what the barriers to practice in the institution are.
Yeah, and I really have to say the Social Planning Council did an absolutely outstanding job in contacting members of the community, because all of the questions on this audit are all really action orientated. Do seniors from different racial and cultural backgrounds interact with one another, or do people tend to form groups of people with similar backgrounds? And that, these are a lot of complaints or suggestions that I've heard from people over the time. But the way the toolkit is set up is that the first thing that you see is the assessment tool, the self-audit. Then after that, it goes into the introduction, why we created it, guiding principles, and then talking about each of the individual domains and why those components are important. So yeah, it's meant to be a thoughtful self-audit. And yes, of course, it's the same with anywhere. If you go through and just fill in the check marks without doing any thinking, that's it. But I think we also need to appreciate how difficult it is for organizations sometimes to change, to get volunteers who are, and an awful lot of senior centers depend on volunteers for most of the critical functions. And training volunteers to be welcoming and inclusive. And people don't, it's difficult at times for people to make those changes.
In addition to enrollment.
We have a couple of comments from the participants. We'll start with Michael and then followed by Joan. Please go ahead, Michael.
Yes, Eric, thanks. Eric, can you read perhaps like the 5 or 6 of the questions so we get a little notion of just exactly what the questions might be?
Sure, be happy to do that. Let's pick. I just read off one question from Cultural Connections. I'll read 1 or 2 more from there. If you serve food, do you offer halal, kosher, and/or vegetarian options? When I was doing housing here at Sage, I had a lady come in and she was a vegetarian from, religious principles, and a lovely, lovely lady. But the management at the seniors facility she was living in said, well, if you're a vegetarian, just don't eat the meat portion. Which, of course, if you're a vegetarian, you need alternate sources of protein and that sort of thing. So that organization was not oppressive. They just didn't know. They just thought that not eating the meat satisfies the vegetarian requirements. Do you offer resources for seniors to learn about different cultures at their own pace? Who is teaching programs at your organization? Do they reflect the diversity of seniors who access your services, the diversity of the diversity of the community in which you are located? Under policies, do you have anti-discrimination and anti-bullying policies? Is there a commitment to inclusion included in your organization's mission? And do decision makers have training in EDI, that's equity, diversity, and inclusion, and or cultural competencies? So those are just some of the questions, Michael. Does that sort of give you the flavor of where we're going?
Yes, thanks. That's quite helpful. Is it going to be available electronically as well as in written form, or what's the thought?
Well, it's going to be certainly available electronically. And we were talking about this at Age Friendly the other week. And, we said, well, 5 years ago, we probably would have printed 2,000 or 3,000 of these. But this time, we're probably only going to print a few. And what we'll do is we'll send out electronically. And if anybody wants a hard copy, well, then we'd be more than happy to print one off and mail it out. But we're thinking primarily of distributing them electronically.
Good. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks, Michael. Joan, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks. This is a excellent reminder of the incidence of good intentions really mean little, because I've had this discussion in my circle of straight people, and they often say things like, well, everybody's inclusive now, it's, we're good. But the whole idea of what a person sees at the point of welcoming, I think that is so important. And as you mentioned, simple things like having a person just greeting you, or maybe something like inclusive pictures or whatever. But it's so easy to say, well, of course everyone's welcome. But when you really break it down like that and go through the checklist, you can really see it from someone else's perspective. So just a comment, and I would definitely be interested in getting the mail out.
Yeah, I plan on sending a copy of this to everybody who's attending today. But you're right, and there was another toolkit that was done in 2016, but it didn't seem to present a clear roadmap, are you doing this, yes or no, sort of thing. And you can get into nuances of, yes, I'm doing this, but I'd like to be doing more. that's part of that self-audit and thinking process, but you definitely need a roadmap to begin with. And, you know, how can you say you're welcoming if you don't have an ambassador or somebody greeting people and saying hello and trying to integrate them in? Not to, Sage is one of our sponsors or one of our hosts. So I'll tell this story, but over the front reception desk, there's a huge sign that's got welcome in how many different languages? Have you counted ever?
No, I have no idea.
I think about 50 different languages, but the exclamation point after welcome is a rainbow triangle. The
Awesome.
whole suggestion is that we want everybody to feel welcomed here. So that's one of the things. But
Yeah.
I think people really need to say, I'm here. How do I get to the next step? Well, let's go through this and have a look.
Right. So again, the visual presentation is very, very important because you can have the physical people standing there to welcome you, but if you're not really up for the contact at that very second in time, if you're freaking out for whatever reason, if your eyes can fall on welcoming pictures, it's a big thing, a real helpful step. So good on you.
Thank you. Larry, you had.
Yes, Larry, a concrete example of what Joan is just saying. When I go into my doctor's office, just behind the reception desk is a huge rainbow, the triangle. And that just makes me feel so much more welcome than I would otherwise. And equally as important, I think, particularly in long-term residences, is it gives a clear signal to everyone what the standards are, and it helps everyone be welcoming. Because one of the things that struck me living in a senior residence is the number of straight grandparents who have family members who are not straight, and that. It's a way of opening conversations that I must say initially surprised me, but in a very pleasant way, no question.
And it's a question of education, gentle education. I use this example quite often is that I'm a gay man. I grew up in the 1950s and the 1960s. So at that time, the media was pushing this message of homosexuality is bad and bad influence on children and all the rest of it. Because I was a gay man, I had to challenge that. But if you think of somebody who grew up in, let's pick on Vegreville for some unknown reason, but if somebody who grew up on a farm or in, you know, out of one of the big cities, who never knowingly has met a gay or a lesbian person or a trans person. For some of those, they never had an opportunity to challenge the presentation that the media was giving about gay people. So it's a question of not trying to hit them over the head, which other past inclusion efforts have tried to do. This effort is to try to educate people gently and to help them move along at their pace. That's it. Nothing else? It's a short meeting.
Does anybody else have any comments for Eric?
I was just gonna quickly speak to our experience at Sage in that when you guys are saying it's visually nice to see the representation, that's nice to hear, but I always have this fear that just because we say we're a welcoming environment or maybe staff have training, that you might end up sitting next to someone in the cafe saying comments that don't represent how we feel or the environment we want to have. And I'm always afraid that just because we put the sticker on the window doesn't mean that's the actual experience. And so, well, obviously feedback is always nice if people don't have a good experience or if they do, but or things that help people feel welcome or comfortable. But beyond that, I just always have this fear, like Eric says, it has to be layers. It has to be not only visual representation. You say you're welcoming, inclusive, but then it has to be staff, then it has to be ingrained in the organization. Hopefully it is a representation of the actual culture of the building and not just because we put a sticker on the door. So
Yeah.
it has always been kind of a part of the journey and well, it's made me very happy that generally it seems to be a positive experience for people coming here from different kind of diverse backgrounds, but I always have this fear because we are a public space and I don't always know what you are going to get when you walk in our door. So
But I think that's part of it is it's setting up the culture. So if you walk into a place where there's welcome in many languages and there's a rainbow triangle, just like your office. And then, you've got welcoming volunteers, you've got other people. Eventually, people who may not hold the same inclusion views as you, but eventually I think people will start to pick up on the idea of this is the culture of this organization. And if I want to be part of this organization and feel that I can contribute, then I need to get with, I need to either moderate my comments or change my views. I think that's why I said it's a slow change that we're looking for, because you can do it fast and do it again in 5 days, or do it slowly and not have to do it again. Sorry, Larry.
I know this perhaps mostly from the point of view of institutions and seniors residences in particular. And one of the complicating factors in that setting is the onset of dementia and the social disinhibitions that occur early in that. And that becomes a very complicated subject and requires understanding, I think, on both sides. It's a subject about which we probably need to, dementia in general, is a subject about which we need to talk more about today.
Absolutely. And that whole idea about, my example of we grew up having to challenge norms.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who grew up not ever having to challenge those norms, and we need to educate them gently. Because if I hit you over the head and say you're a homophobe and a bigot, I don't think you're going to absorb too much more information after that, are you? So, anyways, I see.
Joan had a comment she wanted to add.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. This is where maybe we could get technology working for us some more, like to address what Rachel was saying about, you don't know if you're really including everybody you're trying and on how many layers does that continue. But I just was thinking, what if you had some kind of a kiosk at the very front of an organization, and then maybe there's a blank wall, like your wall, your space, whatever, and you could just sit there in a few seconds, pick some images that are relevant to you, or things that might speak to you, so that immediately, the person who's going to come out and greet you can just sort of skim it over, or you can view it behind the blank wall. I don't know, but it would be a quick and fast way to use imagery to present yourself, or what kind of things are you interested in? Just a quick little advertisement, if you will, for your personal tastes.
Yeah, I can see that. And I think that would be a really good idea for organizations. And part of this is we stress not only physically doing something, so you've got the physical actions, you've got the spoken actions, but you also have the visual actions, and it really has to be a combination of many. Just one thing, Jan, the laptop is fairly far away from me, so I can't see, but Frank has asked if he could get a copy of it, and he's put his email address there. Could you copy that down, Jan, and email it to me so that I can make sure that he gets a copy of it, as well as if you could mark down the attendees so that I can email out.
That's already done, Eric. Can Frank put his email in the chat?
It is in chat already. I'm seeing it.
That's
Oh, no,
weird.
it was direct to me. Frank, can you send that maybe to Jan instead? Is Frank still with us? No, I don't think so. Okay, I will. If you talk amongst yourself, don't go.
Is there anyone who's got questions or comment. We're having trouble seeing at the distance, so please just speak up if you have a comment or question.
I had a quick comment, Larry, how you said at your doctor's office, it's nice to see
Yeah.
just the representation, but to me, the next layer of that, interestingly, the doctor still walked in and looked at my daughter and said, "Oh, you're 17, so do you have a boyfriend yet?" And immediately she was like, "Okay, well, I know that might be an awkward conversation, like not ever having to say what way she aligned, but just that next level of maybe, or even at the nursing home, I know you naturally were like, oh, and where's Mr. So-and-so? And you just naturally tend to, so just that,
Yeah.
it just makes that next conversation awkward then without it having to be. So even though the sign is on the wall, it's this ingrained kind of
And so
habits.
those retraining those questions, which is, instead of do you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, is there somebody special in your life?
Yeah.
And who is it that, if you had an accident or an injury, who is it that you would like us to contact?
Can I encourage you both to be here when Guy Milner and Petra Duncan will talk about the standardized patient program used for medical students, so that this narrowness can be obliterated at least over time.
Yeah.
Yes, because I
There's
have a lot
also
of
nothing
ages.
wrong with correcting your doctor.
Ageist things that always get said too, like, oh, I'm so shocked to be working at a senior center and seeing them. I never pictured them doing line dance like that. And I'm like, what did you pick? I don't know. There's so many layers of wanting to change people's ingrained thoughts.
Yeah, exactly.
Anybody else have any comments?
Unless there are any other questions or comment that anyone needs to make, I'm going to draw us to a somewhat early conclusion. I thank you very much, Eric, for all the work that goes into this talk and for the talk itself. It really is an important issue. I'd like to thank you as well, to my colleagues for their technical assistance, which had some glitches today, I will concede. And thank you again to all of you for your patience in getting through our glitches. I hope that we will see you next week when our speaker will be S.J. Lafayette, who is the Executive Director of Pride Center of Edmonton, and he will be talking about that organization. And let me say as well, before we conclude finally, that on a regular basis, Eric and I will be here at Sage, Classroom C, just across 100th Street from City Hall, to begin our much delayed in-person component. Let me emphasize that the Zoom component will stay just as it is with less technical glitches. Sage is employing a staged reopening and presently requires masking in all areas except classroom A, which is being used as a lunchroom. If you wish to bring coffee or snacks, the Sage cafeteria isn't open yet. We can use this room sort of before or after the meeting to have some in-person chatting. So thank you again, and we will close the meeting unless there's any final thing that I haven't seen.
No, well, thanks very much, everyone. And if I can figure out how to do this, we will end the session. I can't get my mouse to work here. But anyways, thanks very much, everyone, and take care.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, Rachel.
Michelle.
Bye.
I don't know her.
Yeah.